Welcome to History Stories Dose, one story 10 parts, subscribe now.
The flames of Persepolis had barely cooled, but the Macedonian army was standing at the absolute summit of the ancient world. They had dismantled the Persian Empire and claimed a volume of gold and silver that defied calculation. For the soldiers, the logic of the moment was simple. They had won. It was time to pack the wagons, turn around, and finally go home to Macedonia as supreme conquerors. But Alexander saw a glaring void in the victory. As long as King Darius III remained free, his conquest was incomplete. To Alexander, a living rival meant an unfinished war. He ordered his exhausted men to delay their homecoming, turn their backs to the Mediterranean, and march deeper into the east to hunt down the fleeing king. They spent months chasing a ghost across lethal terrain. The food ran out. They endured freezing temperatures and navigated impossible mountain passes. Alexander had stopped fighting for geopolitical security. He was now chasing a personal obsession, dragging his men to the breaking point of their loyalty. The chase ended in total anticlimax. When Alexander finally caught up, he found Darius bleeding to death by the side of the road, stabbed and abandoned by his own commanders. Alexander threw his own royal cloak over his dying rival. He ordered a traditional Persian burial and swore a vow to execute the man who had orchestrated the betrayal, a noble named Bessus. Hunting Bessus pulled the Macedonians out of the world they knew and into Central Asia, specifically the rocky, unforgiving provinces of Bactria and Sogdiana. The days of massive, organized field battles were over. The local tribes refused to face the Greek phalanx head-on, launching punishing hit-and-run strikes before vanishing back into the wilderness. The campaign dragged out for years. The veterans had now been away from their families for nearly a decade, fighting invisible enemies in a wasteland with no rich cities left to plunder. The chaotic environment neutralized their military discipline. Without clear victories or spoils to keep them motivated, a toxic resentment began spreading through the ranks. To stabilize this massive, rebellious territory, Alexander made a controversial calculation. This animated diagram shows how he integrated elements of the conquered Persian administration directly into his own empire's power structure. He adopted Persian royal clothing and promoted Persian aristocrats into high-level administrative roles, placing them in direct authority over his own men. The Macedonian veterans felt sickened. These were the exact enemies they spent years bleeding to defeat, and now they were being asked to take orders from them. The tension finally boiled over during a long, drunken banquet in Bactria, escalating into a screaming match between Alexander and a senior general named Clitus the Black. Clitus was the veteran who had physically saved Alexander's life at the Battle of Granicus, severing an enemy's arm just before they could strike the king down. Intoxicated and deeply insulted by his old friend's criticisms, Alexander snapped. He grabbed a guard's spear and hurled it, driving the weapon straight through the man who had kept him alive. The room fell dead silent. Horrified by his own violent reflex, the conqueror locked himself away in his tent for days, refusing food, paralyzed by mourning and regret. He had the strategic brilliance to outmaneuver the largest armies on earth, yet proved entirely incapable of controlling his own volatile impulses. Alexander eventually forced himself out of isolation. His troops tracked down Bessus, and Alexander executed the usurper, fulfilling his final promise to Darius. He also secured the region by marrying a local Bactrian noblewoman named Roxana. It was a rare instance of genuine affection mixed with calculated politics, cementing a symbolic union between Europe and Asia. Alexander now governed from a court filled with Persian nobles, dressed in Eastern silks and ruling as a multicultural emperor rather than a simple Macedonian king. With the eastern frontier subdued and the Persian throne secure, the logical move was to stop, govern the territory, and let his veterans finally go home. Instead, he gathered his exhausted men and ordered them to keep marching east. Alexander's sights were set on India, a landscape divided by massive rivers and guarded by kings who commanded actual monsters, towering war elephants that the Greek phalanx had no idea how to fight. The brutal years in the East had forged a man who could no longer recognize an endpoint. His ambition had mutated into a perpetual engine, pushing him toward mythic immortality, regardless of how many of his own men he broke to get there.